Tonight, I need to talk about you. What I mean is, I need to talk about the word you, because it's the most important subject for us to consider on this holiest of days, on the eve of Yom Kippur. It may seem strange, but it's true. I'll explain. As you know, there are words that can have a variety of meanings. For instance, the word go has 368 meanings, and Sept has 430, and the word run has over 600. But the word you has an infinite number of meanings. Because when I say you, I could mean you, Chip, or Sharon, or Joe, or Wendy. And we have a few Wendy's in our community, and each one is quite different from the other. The word you could mean you as an individual or as a group of people, like you, the members of our community, or you, the people I haven't had the good fortune to meet yet. And there are temporal variations. You who are here with us tonight, or you who might hear these words at some later point in time. And I'm not alone in bringing this up on Yom Kippur. In fact, the Torah portion we'll read tomorrow morning begins, Atem nitzavim, you stand here this day, all of you, before Adonai your God. In saying Atem, Moses is speaking to the people there and then, but also to us here and now. He includes tribal heads and elders all the way down to the water carrier in the covenant that he says is intended for all Jews, past and future. And for us, the word you can address not only Jews, but anyone. In fact, why stop there? We often use the word you when addressing our pets. Like, why did you eat that roasted chicken that I left on the counter? Or, do you want to go for a walk? It's an incredible word. And yet, how many times a day do we use it? You probably can't even count the times because we use it so frequently and so casually. But Yom Kippur is a day when it really is all about you. The very first Yom Kippur took place about 3,000 years ago at Mount Sinai, after the sin of the golden calf. Moses had been up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights to receive from God all the commandments. The Israelites became restless and doubted that he would ever return. So we read in Exodus chapter 32 that they say to Aaron, "Make us a god who shall go before us." For that man Moses, we don't know what's happened to him. So Aaron collected all their gold jewelry, melted it down, and used it to make the golden calf. The Israelites felt they needed a God they could see and touch. How could Moses expect them to be in relationship with an invisible God whose essence is incomprehensible? That was too much to ask of them. And so they fashioned, bowed before, and made sacrifices to a molten God and said, "This is our God who brought us out of the land of Egypt." So God informed Moses that all this was going on when he was still up on the mountain. And he said, "Just let me destroy them and start over with you and your family." But Moses spoke up to defend the people. He asked for forgiveness on their behalf, on our behalf, and convinced God not to destroy us, but to give us a second chance. We still have trouble making sense of a God whose essence is incomprehensible. And so for the past 3,000 years, our ancestors conjured images of a father, a king, a judge, and especially on Yom Kippur when our liturgy is filled with these images. But whether it's a graven image or a mental image, it's still an image. And so here we are, just like we were on the eve of the very first Yom Kippur. But Moses was an iconoclast, a destroyer of idols. You might recall how in the Torah, Moses was constantly telling people to smash the idols that their neighbors worshiped so that they wouldn't be tempted to worship them as well. Many other prophets and rabbis said basically the same thing. Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher of the 13th century Spain, said that we can only know God by what God is not. Now, most rabbis and Jewish philosophers have long understood that images like king, father, judge are only metaphors that say more about us than anything about God. But sadly, such a nuanced message rarely makes it out beyond the discussions that take place in salons and seminaries. Many people today have simply rejected any notions they had about God and just left it there. You've probably noticed that in prayer I often use the word Havaya instead of Adonai. And I know that it works for some people, but doesn't work for others. The word Adonai means my Lord, or actually my lords. But we no longer live in a world of lords and ladies and kings. I prefer to think of God as being or existence, which is what Havaya means. But I'm learning that in a congregational community like ours, familiarity and custom often take precedence over principle. And so I choose to be flexible about the names I use for God, which brings me back to my thoughts about you. In addition to your given name, you may also be known as son, father, daughter, mother, brother, sister, neighbor, doctor, author, activist, student. But no single word or title encompasses all the aspects of who you are, except for the word, you. Even if you've changed your hair color or your name or your gender, you are still you. Even if you use the pronoun they, you are still you. And here's a point that I think is most important. No individual can make an exclusive claim to the word you. It belongs to each one of us equally. In fact, it is each one of us equally. It transcends any individual identity, yet is like the source or root of every individual identity. You know, I travel to Aspen, Colorado from time to time, and you might have heard of a phenomenon involving aspen trees. They can be connected to each other by a single root system underground. And in that way, an entire forest can actually be a single living organism. It's called an aspen clone, and the largest clone is in southern Utah. It's known as the trembling giant because the leaves of aspen trees often appear to tremble and because it encompasses over 100 acres. And it's been aged to be 80,000 years old. Although most aspen clones are only 5,000 to 10,000 years old. This is the closest analogy I can think of if I were to describe how one consciousness, one you with a capital Y, can appear as many. Now, I'm not asking you to believe in anything supernatural, and I'm not playing around with semantics. I'm just asking you, urging you to think deeply about the word you and what it means. If I were to say to someone, oh, it's just you, can you see how thoughtless and insulting a statement like that would be? You may have heard of the German philosopher Martin Buber, the German Jewish philosopher who had a lot to say about this. He wrote a book entitled Ich und Du, a title that's been translated into English as I and thou. But the German word du just means you, just as we've been speaking here. But the guy who translated the book into English in 1937 thought the word you sounded a little too prosaic, so he chose the word thou instead. But don't let it make you think he's talking about anything grandiose, anything more than what we're talking about here. He said that there are basically two kinds of relationships. One is between I and it, in which I am related to someone or something that I regard pretty much as an object. If I relate to you based only on the role or function that you serve for me, that's an I-it relationship. On the other hand, a relationship that conveys respect and mutuality is an I-you relationship. There's an I and there's a you. Everything else, labels, needs, differences, all of these can be easily overlooked. That's the kind of relationship in which unconditional love becomes possible. Buber said that most relationships bear some measure of combination of each quality, but the healthier and more pro-social relationships reflect a greater degree of the I-you relational dynamic. I'll say one more thing about that. In a religious context, he said often people can have an I-it relationship with God. That's when they obey God because God can fulfill their needs or because they might be punished otherwise. There's a transactional nature to this kind of relationship. If I do this for you, you do that for me. On the other hand, an I-thou relationship with God is completely different. Some of you know Norman Fisher. He's a renowned Zen priest and poet, and well known here in the Bay Area. He recently participated in a program with our friends Joseph and Julie over at Chokhmat Halev. And Listen and I recently spent a week with him in a meditation retreat. A while back, Norman published a Zen-inspired translation of the Psalms entitled Opening to You. He explained that the word God, with all its baggage, presents a serious problem for so many. And so instead of using the various names for God or even the word God itself, he chose to use one English word, the word you. Hence the title, Opening to You. The title of his most recent book, When You Greet Me, I Bow, conveys a similar message. You know, like the Hindu greeting, Namaste, which means I bow to the divinity within you. You might think this is a heady philosophical discussion we're having, but actually it's the most immediate and pressing subject we could be discussing now. Because the more I value the word you, even regarding it as sacred, the more my attitudes and relationships will reflect that. Every single relationship, every single encounter becomes sacred. If I value the you that's looking back at me through your eyes right now, the more honest I want to be. The more I value the word you that looks out at the world through the eyes of a child, the more patient and loving I want to be. The more I value the you that looks out at the world through the eyes of a refugee, the more I want to help him or her find safety. The more I value the you that looks out at the world through the eyes of a cow or a chicken, the more compelled I feel to be a vegetarian. And it works the other way, too. When a man like Harvey Weinstein commits offenses against women, it's an offense not only against those particular women, but against all women. When a racist attacks or discriminates against a person of color, it has a detrimental impact on many more people than the particular person he or she harmed. A lack of respect for anyone reflects a lack of respect for everyone, including one's own self. There's a great story about the Rabbi of Brisk. It's a town in Eastern Europe. And he was traveling home on a train when he rudely was treated by a traveling salesman who doesn't recognize him. And when they arrive in Brisk and the salesman realizes whom he has offended, He begs forgiveness repeatedly and tries to make good, and yet the rabbi firmly rejects him. He finally asks the rabbi's son to intervene, and the rabbi explains to the son that the salesman had not known who he was, so he offended a common man, and it is to that person he should apologize. In other words, the failure was not the salesman's offense against the rabbi's prestige, but rather his lack of basic decency toward a person whom he deemed ordinary. Our society, our planet really, is gravely suffering from this I-it relational dynamic on so many levels. We have disregarded, trivialized, and denigrated the value of that single sacred word, you. All the confessions we recite on Yom Kippur relate to this problem. The words in our Machzor say it as plain as I could say it. We have sinned against you. I have sinned against you. I have not accorded you the respect you deserve. I have allowed other thoughts and assumptions to devalue my relationship to you. I have not done more to help you who sees through the eyes of immigrants, of homeless people, of abused women, and starving children. I have not done more to help you who sees through the eyes of animals who depend on clean air and water for life, who are dying because of the consequences of climate change. And so to conclude, it is time we set aside the idols, the images, the labels that cause me to think less of you, and vice versa. It's not as important to focus on the names or images of God when we come to the words Baruch Atah Adonai, because the most important part of that phrase is Baruch Atah. Blessed are you. That could be a good mantra for the next 24 hours. I could not be more passionate about this than Moses was when he reprimanded the people for worshiping a golden calf. We are here just as we were on the first Yom Kippur, praying that we might not be destroyed or that we might not destroy ourselves. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the practical implications of internalizing this message. But for now, and for at least the next 24 hours, when we address anyone as you, or the one we address as you, with a capital Y, know that both are equally important and sacred, because you and you are essentially one and the same. Baruch Atah. Blessed are you and you.